especially to the bravery of my parents who survived the Holocaust. Can everybody hear me? Do you hear me and there? It is called not only Yom HaShoah, it is called in Hebrew Yom HaShoah veHagvura. And Gvura means bravery. And the symbol of the Yom of the Shoah from the Holocaust Museum is a branch that starts with a barbed wire, and it's a barbed wire on the bottom, and from it comes out an olive tree, a sprout of an olive tree. And I'm one of those sprouts that came out of the barbed wire. My parents, both of them, were born in Druya, which is a small town in Belarus. It's on the border with Latvia. At the time when my parents were born, it was under Polish government. Later it was conquered by Russia. The territory kept on coming back and forth. And Druya was a main, it was a cultural center, especially for Jews. There was a, thank you, there was a Jewish day school, thank you. There was a Jewish day school, a secular, there was a Hasidic school, and there was a Jewish high school from where many students who came from different towns around would gather in Druya to study Jewish studies and other studies. My mother was born on a small village called Petashne, and she lived there till she was 14, till the time when her mother passed away. And her father decided to move to the city, to Druya, so his children will be among more Jews. My grandfather was a flax dealer. He grew the flax, he sold it, and on his land, also on the property, people would come and clean the flax before it was shipped to England. My father was also resident of Druya. He was born in Druya. He was one out of 9 children. My mother was one out of 3. And my father, only he and his sister survived the war. My father was able to save 2 children. My mother saved one of her 3 children. And both of them lost their spouses in the war. My father, going back to my father, he was an owner of property, of stores, and a hotel. It was not a real big hotel. In Russian they call it gastinitsa, which is almost like a bed and breakfast. But in those days it was considered big time. He was considered to be a capitalist, which Stalin punished him and sent him to Siberia right before the Nazis came in. And his train was bombarded on the way to Siberia by the Nazis, and he came walking back to the ghetto. By that time, Druya was already in the ghetto, and he came back to the ghetto. This is a picture of my mother in her young age, at the age of 18, before she cut her hair. That was a big story. She wanted to take a picture, cut her hair, and then she had short hair. And this is a picture of her and her husband, her first husband, my Meir's father. Meir is my brother who lives in Israel. And this was in 1932. Again, Meir's father here with other friends. None of them survived. And this is a picture, a family picture of a wedding. My uncle and his bride, my grandfather. None of the people on this picture survived the war. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit on my mother's tale of, a real story, not the tale, of how she managed to survive and save Meir. They were forced to come into a ghetto in Druya. The Jews were divided into 2 groups, those who were necessary people and those who were not necessary. And according to that, the Nazis divided the group. The necessary were those who had to work, who did the work. The unnecessary were those who didn't have to do work that the Nazis needed. And that's how they divided the ghetto. They split the ghetto. My mother and her family stayed in their house. That part of the ghetto was where the necessary Jews lived. Because her husband worked in a rice mill, so he would bring the food. They needed him to do the work. In the house, she is telling they had a house of 4 bedrooms. When the ghetto was established, 24 people were added into the household. And then before that, there were 5 people living in the house. At the time of the ghetto, 24 people, additional 24 people joined into the house because they had to leave their homes and come and live in the ghetto. And it was a crowded place. And she used to tell about, my grandfather would establish the minyanim in the house. They would pray there. And after the minyanim in the evening, they would sit and debate and talk about what is going to happen. What do you think in politics is happening? And you have to remember, there was no television, no radio. There was radio, and telephone was very a scarce thing. They kept on hearing about people running away from other ghettos where people were led to the big pit in that area and were shot, or in the forest. And they were constantly hoping that something will happen, a miracle will happen, and it will not come to their city. It happened on June 16, early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. My mother's husband, he was on guard. They had guards standing in front of the windows to see what was going to happen. And, before that, 2 weeks before that, my mother, in one of the conversations, people decided that they will hide with other people out of the city, with farmers. They used to call them the goyim, the people who were not Jews. And every family had some kind of people that they were somehow connected to them, whether it was business-wise or socially in other ways. And my mother, with her 3 children, went to live or to hide with that family. Her husband could not come because he was one of the necessary, and if he wasn't at work, he would be missed. And if Jews didn't come to do the work for the Nazis, other Jews were killed because of it for punishment. So that way they kind of made sure that nobody runs away from the ghetto. And my mother was there in hiding for 2 weeks. Her older daughter, Miriam, after 2 weeks started nagging my mother. How could you leave your husband? How could you leave my father? We are going to be safe and he's not going to be safe. Whatever, and she kept on nagging her. And my mother looked at the child and said, we are going back. And she returned back 2 nights before that June 16 date. And in the meantime, when they went to hide with that family, they also brought with them gold and jewelry and silverware as a payment for the future food or whatever hiding that they would take care of. And she left it with that family, thinking that if something happens, she will go back there. On the 16th in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, Mayor's father he heard that the Germans are surrounding the ghetto again and commanding people to get out of their houses fast. He immediately took the baby that was 1.5 years old. Mayor at that time was almost 4 years old, and the older daughter, Miriam. Mother held Miriam and Mayor in her hands, and Yehudila held the baby, Dovitke, and he said to her, let's run, let's go out of the house before they reach us. Each one of us will take a different path. I will go to one side, you go to the other side. This way, at least one of us will have a chance to survive. And they ran, and right before she ran out, her father was covered with a talit, and she said he blessed her, and that blessing kept her going along the way. And she came out of the house, and she decided to run toward the river. The city Druya is on the river Dvina, which is a very big river that goes from the Baltic into Russia, and Druika, which kind of, it's a smaller river that pours into the Dvina. And they are like on a peninsula. Druya is on the peninsula. And she decided to run toward the Druika, which on the other side is the big forest. And she knew that the forest would be a place for her to hide. And she was holding both kids and running out of the house. Will you please stay up the next? Okay. And as she was running out of the house, her house was on top here of the street. And the other, a little bit farther down. And she decided to run. You see where that arrow up there is. That's toward the river. She was going to run that way. But where that arrow is, were standing two soldiers and shooting at her and Mayor. And somehow the bullets did not hit her. And instead of continuing to run straight forward, she decided, when this arrow points, to move into that small street. And right behind her, houses started to burn. Some of the young Jewish people decided that once they were forced to leave their houses, they were not going to leave the houses for the Nazis and for the other people. And they threw matches on the houses to burn the houses. They knew where they were going because they dug a big hole the day before. So Mother and Mayor started running into that arrow, and remember, Mother had Miriam with her hand also. And as she's getting into that corner, she sees a young man standing still, and she says to him, "Why don't you run?" He says, "It's lost. Everywhere they're shooting at us." And she says to him, "Run, run wherever you can." At my mother's shiva, that man came, and he said the reason he stayed alive was because of my mother. She was yelling at him, she said. She was running with two kids, and she's yelling at me, telling me, "You are a young man, run. You can save yourself." She ran into the street. Behind her, everything is burning. And the first house that she saw, she ran into it. And right here, under this porch, now it's kind of cemented. There were only big rocks lying around. She moved away a rock, pushed Mayor in, and looked around to look for Miriam, and Miriam wasn't there. She somewhere lost her along the way. And she doesn't know, she didn't know, we still don't know if Miriam ever made it or not. That's a whole different story. But she pushed Mayor in fast, crawled herself under the porch, and rolled the rock. And in the meantime, the soldiers who were standing up there came looking for her in the house. And they're yelling at the woman, "Where is the Jew?" And she says, "What Jew?" She saw Mother coming into the house, crawling out under the porch, didn't say a word. And the house is, we talk about the house that is probably the size of, one small corner of this place. And it's divided into a tiny kitchen with a big oven and another bedroom where they eat and they sleep and everything else. That's the house. And maybe another bedroom. And he went through and he says, "I have to do more work. I will be back." And of course, Mother and Mayor hear it. He's a 4-year-old, and Mother has her hand over his mouth because he was crying. He was scared. He terrified. And she has to make sure that he's not coughing or sneezing or anything at that time. And immediately, her name was Kuzma, the last name was Kuzma. Mrs. Kuzma came out and put a trap for the pigs right in front of the porch. And the pigs came to eat there. And as she's feeding the pigs, she's talking to Mother and says, "Luba, I know you're here. I will not give you out. I will not turn you in. But please be quiet, and I will bring you food. And where is your husband? Where are the other children?" Mother said, "I don't know. Maybe you can go and look for them." later the woman said that the reason that her house did not burn down, that house was the only house that didn't burn down in the whole neighborhood, was because she was hiding my mother, because that's how God paid her back. She was a really devout Christian, and she believed that that's what happened. Her husband went out to look for my mother's husband, for the children, and he came back with very sad news that he witnessed, the body being carried into the grave, and the baby too. Did not see Miriam. Miriam's footsteps were not found. And in the meantime, more soldiers came to look for into the house. They turned everything up. They went up into the attic, did not find my mother, and she's lying down there, hearing their footsteps, and again, trying to keep Mayor quiet. And while this has happened, she's witnessing through the cracks in the porch how other Jews, people that she lived, her friends, her best friends, her neighbors, relatives, are being led to the grave, being, with the guns, and that's where they were put in front of the pit and shot, rolled into the pit. So Mother and Mayor were there for 2 days and 2 nights. On the 3rd day, Mr. Kuzma came and told Mother, you have to leave because the Germans are bringing sniffing dogs to find more Jews. By that time, the shooting subsided. There wasn't that much shooting, but the Germans and the locals who collaborated with the Nazis, many of them, went to look for Jews in hiding. They found them in bathhouses, they found them in cellars, they found them in attics, they found them in different places of hiding. And for every Jew that the neighbors, the locals found, they would get a pound of salt or a bar of soap. That was a big prize. Or they could rob their houses or whatever was left of the houses. So that was their interest in that. And so Mother waited for the night to fall. Mrs. Kuzma baked 2 big loaves of bread and gave them to Mother and said, this is all I have. I don't have food myself. I cannot give you anything else. And during the time that they were under there, Mrs. Kuzma brought milk, that she had from, she owned a cow, and she brought milk for Mayor to drink. And later, when we came to visit, on this visit here, her granddaughter was telling the story of her grandmother telling that she didn't have milk for herself, but she gave the milk for the little boy named Mayor. And she's telling the story just like I'm telling you the story. That story goes in her family about how she saved the Jewish woman. Mother, at night, as the night fell, Mr. Kuzma went out to see where there is less guards standing, and he found a path through the gardens. They both knew the place very well. He told her to go through which gardens to jump and to go through to get to the Duika, to the river, to a shallow place that she could pass through and then go into the forest. Her intention was to go back to the place where she was hiding before. And of course, they had to be very quiet. There were already dogs outside. They were barking. Mother, through the forest, through the gardens, was able to get to the river. She took a big stick to be able to measure how deep it was because she was carrying Mayor. And Mayor was a small, chubby kid. And she had to carry him through, so she was measuring the depth to be able to carry him through. And as they got into the forest, she said, we are now going back to the place where we were. And Mayor, the 4-year-old, says to Mother, do you think it would be wise to go back there? That person probably wants the gold. He doesn't want us. And he will be afraid that if you come, you will ask for the money back. And Mother listened again to the child and didn't go back to that place. And she decided to go to the woman who worked for her, whose name was Stefka. And this is Stefka. And Stefka Sokolovskaya. and was not Jewish. Mother never visited her in the village where she lived, and it was about 5 kilometers away from Tvuya. And then they knew the name of the town, how to get to that small village. And at night, mother walks around in the village, looks into windows, sees that in some houses there are German soldiers sitting drunk, in some places, other farmers who were not friendly to the Jews are sitting. And she was looking around, and suddenly she remembered that she gave Stefka wood and nails. My mother owned a hardware store in Tvuya. She gave her nails and wood because she needed to build new stairs into her old house. So at night, in the dark, she was looking for a house with new wooden stairs and big nails attached to it. And sure enough, she found the stairs, and on the line, she saw the clothes that Stefka hung to dry that she recognized. And looking in the window, she saw the pots that she gave her a gift a while ago, standing in the corner there on the oven. She knocked on the door. When Stefka opened the door and saw my mother, she fainted. And when she came back, she said, "And where is the rest of the family?" She said, "They are gone." And she said, "Well, Meir is my child. He was born." She was helping the midwife when my mother was giving birth to Meir. She said, "He's like my child. Of course I'll take care of you." And she set them up in the barn. She had a barn outside of the house. And she set them up in the barn on top, took away the ladder, and every morning she would bring my mother food and milk. And that was still summer. Remember, it is Belarus and it is June. It is still warm and nice, and you can sleep outside. They were there till about, I would say, August. And in August one night, my mother, as she's up there in the barn with Meir, hears somebody trying to climb up in the barn. It's built like Lincoln logs. You know how the Lincoln logs are built a cabin? Somebody trying to climb up to the top. And mother was telling Meir to be quiet, not to make any sounds. And as he's climbing, one part broke and the person fell. And Meir says he put in a big curse in Russian and walked out. Later, they found out that that person kept on coming back to Stefka, harassing her, saying, "I know that you're hiding Luba. You worked for Luba. Luba was not killed. Luba survived with her children, and I will get a pound of salt for Luba, and I will turn you in. I know you're hiding Luba." And he would come in unexpected hours because, he would come and knock on the door and open the door and walk in. And he says, "I know Luba is here." And in the meantime, so they knew that he's suspecting that she's in the barn. So Stefka took her in to the house and she hid her in the attic. And mother said that in the attic there were rats and mice and lice and other insects. And they constantly had to, de-lice themselves. That was get the mice away from them and turned into a pet, one mouse. And, she tried to get Meir really busy and thinking, and she asked Stefka for needles and yarn, and she taught Meir how to knit. But they had only one spool of yarn, and Meir would knit something and then take it apart and knit again and knit again, and that kept him busy. And she said that after a while she went dry of stories and legends and Bible stories, whatever she could come up with to keep him entertained and busy. When it got really, really cold, the top it got to 20 degrees Celsius below zero. That's very cold. And she decided to put mother under the oven. In Russia, there are brick ovens. They are about 2 on 2 meters, and on the bottom it's empty. There they keep the chicken in the winter, and you put the food. There is a place for the wood to burn. Then the food that you prepare, there is an opening, and on top that's the preferred place to sleep in the winter. So if you are a very important guest, that's where they would put you in the winter to sleep, or the kids sleep there, or whatever. And I saw some of those ovens. I wish I had a picture here to show you. Anyway, so Mother and Mayor were under that oven, sleeping in the winter nights, and still having to be very quiet, not to be surprised by anybody. And while they were there, Mayor would hear stories of the people who would come to either harass Stefka or visit her, about Jewish women who left their children in churches, about Jewish women who killed their babies, who choked their babies so their babies wouldn't cry, not to be found. And Mayor started tying himself to Mother every night because he was afraid that she would leave him. He was a 4-year-old child. And hearing all these stories and constantly asking, when, what are we going to do? Why is it happening to us? And whenever I hear this, the poem about another butterfly, Mayor kept on nagging Mother, why did you make me a Jew? Why didn't you make me a bird? And that was something that he kept on asking her the whole time. So they were there under the oven, trying to hide, trying to be small as possible. And remember that all this time, Stefka herself, very, very poor, sharing whatever she has, her food, with Mother and Mayor, being very careful, knowing that Mother kept kosher because she worked in her kitchen, fed her only dairy food. And Mayor, who was very small, he got the best of the food. He got the butter, he got the top of the milk, with the sour cream, and he became even chubbier than he was before. And in February, a piece of wood fell down where they were hiding, and the house started burning. And Mother and Mayor had to get out of that, from under the oven, and get out of there, and very fast. Of course, they couldn't find his shoes because he tied his shoes together. Mother taught him how to tie his shoes. And that night he decided to take his shoes off. They always slept with the shoes on, ready to run. Couldn't find his shoes because they were tied together and they were on the side. She pushed him out, and there was only one exit, one door. She broke the window and ran through the back window into the barn, but it was snow, and their footprints were in the snow. Stefka, not thinking about herself and not thinking about the house, ran right behind them to disguise their footsteps so they will not be seen, because the fire was seen in the whole village, and people started coming with buckets of water, that was the fire department, to pour water on the house to put the fire out. And in the meantime, Mother ran into the barn, and there was no ladder to climb up. And remember, those things to climb up broke. But the cow was tied, was there. Mother put Mayor on the cow, climbed on the cow, climbed to the top barn, to the part where they're in the barn on top, and then first she tied the cow to a post so the cow would not walk away, and that was her only sweater that she had. She tied the cow to the post, put Mayor and herself on top. Then she held Mayor by his legs, and he untied the sweater to let the sweater go, pulled him up, and went under the straw pail of straw. And of course, neighbors came running, looking for them. And they searched around, and they said, there is no way that somebody can get up there to the top of the barn, because there is no ladder, there are no steps, nobody can get up there. And in the meantime, Stefka's house was completely burned. And she had to move with her sister. And that's where she lived for the rest of her life. She's recognized by Yad Vashem as a righteous Gentile. In Yad Vashem, her name is there. And in the forest, if you go to the forest of the righteous Gentiles, there is a plaque with her name on it too. That was the least we could do for her. And anyway, Mother was there in the barn for 2 nights, till kind of people stopped coming by. And then she decided she needs to move on to another place of hiding. Stefka could not help her anymore. And at night, again, she started going to another place, to another village, to the place where she was born, in the direction of that town, not really knowing to whom or where she was going. And on the way, she fell through an ice. She had to pass a creek. It was frozen, but that place was really there. The ice was not completely frozen. She fell, sank in. And all her clothes froze on her in the water. And she could not move. And 4-year-old Mayor hands her a big stick. And he says, "Mom, with the stick, go out." And she pushed herself with the stick out of the frozen creek. And she says, like a popsicle, I walked with Mayor. He kept her warm. And he didn't have shoes, and she took off her sweater, and the sleeves she made into pants for him, and he walked on the sweater, his pants. Those were his pants and shoes. And she realized that on her way where she's going lived a person who was a nurse. He was a nurse during the First World War, and her family knew his family, and she decided to go to his place. His name was Ivan Sokolovsky, and she knocked on the door, and Ivan said, "Luba, come in." He immediately knew what to do with a frozen person, put up a pail of cold water, put her into a Mayor he put on the oven to keep warm. He fed them. They kept the night there. But early in the morning, before his children woke up, they had to cross a small street. He dressed her with his wife's clothes. Mayor he put in a big basket so he will not be seen, and he moved them into the barn. And in that barn, Mother and Mayor were probably for 5 or 6 months hiding on top, where he constantly would, in the morning, go and feed the animals with Mother and Mayor, take out the pail of poop or whatever they were doing, cleaning them up, bringing again food in the evening, again cleaning up, and kept them really alive that way. And then he was telling Mother that there is a message going around in town that the Nazis are looking for Jews, and looking for her in particular. They knew that she was alive. And locals were also kind of suspicious, looking for her. And then she has to move to go somewhere else. And that night, she went out in the direction, and he arranged for her a place to stay with his brother. Not with his brother, with a cousin. And that cousin was the person that bought for my grandfather the house that my mother was born in. And on the way, Mother started hearing barks. She thought, what are all these dogs doing out there? And suddenly the barks became louder and louder, and eyes, she said electrical eyes were looking at her, and she realized that these are wolves looking for food. And she climbed, and she pushed Mayor under a big haystack that was in the field, pushed herself under it, and till the morning she stayed there the whole day. And while they were in that haystack during the day, she saw nuns walking with children. And Mayor said to Mother, "Look, there is Lala." That was the nickname for Miriam. They called her Lala. And Mother said, "Quiet." And Mother said they walked away. The nun and girls, mainly girls, walked away. That was the last sighting that Mother says that she had of Miriam. We are not sure if it was really Lala or not. That wasn't what that Mother tells. The next night, Mother came back to Sokolovsky, and he said, "You survived the wolves." And she said, "Yes, I did." And he says, "I will take you tonight to the other place." She went to the other place again, stayed there for another probably 8 months. And it was between being in the barn, being in the bathhouse. In the bathhouse in those bathhouses, there is like a brick meter by meter thing that you pour the water in, and under it you have the fire. It's a banya. Those who know a banya, what a banya is, and it has a small faucet, and you pour the water and you pour it on yourself. And it was an old banya that belonged to the Pashkevich family. Actually, my grandfather built it. And that's where mother used to crumble up, roll into where the water used to be, and have mayor there as well. And often, soldiers would come by looking for her, locals, or looking for Jews. And one day, one of them actually opened the door, and the other one says, "Why are you going in there? We have been there before. Let's go." Miracles happened for her many times. And until one day, she heard somebody speaking in Yiddish. What happened, partisans who were in the forests right behind those villages, partisans came to rob the farmers. They would rob their food, they would rob their clothing. That's what they lived from. And the woman, and that was the Pashkevich family where mother was hiding. This is Marila Pashkevich and this is Vladska Pashkevich. They were the people who hid mother. And this was the bathhouse. Down, this is the banya where they were. And down there is the river where they would get the water into the banya. And this is like a stack of hay under which mother hid. You can tell this one. And so Marila says to the partisans, I'm giving you all my food, but I will have no food to feed Luba and her son. And he says, what do you mean? You have a Jewish woman? Yes. Where? Down there. So the Jewish partisans went down to the bathhouse and started talking in Yiddish. Mother came out. She says she could barely walk. She had to really get hold on things because she was about to fall. She couldn't walk straight. And there was a partisan, a Russian partisan, the commander of the partisans. And when he saw Mayor, he says, we cannot take them. We don't take children. And mother says, I saved this child. I cannot leave him here. He is my child. And the partisan, as he's talking with mother, or trying to entertain Mayor, takes out a hand grenade, pulls out the pin, and throws at Mayor. And Mayor missed it, and it fell, and it didn't explode. And the partisan, that Russian partisan, said he has been a soldier, he has never seen a hand grenade that didn't explode. And that is for him a sign that he has to save this child. This child is his responsibility. They put mother and Mayor into the wagon, covered them up, and made their way into the partisans, where they were for the next year and a half. Mayor was the mascot of the partisans, always riding on the first horse with the commander. If they went through, there are many swamps in that area. Mayor would be tied with a big rope, and he was like the yardstick that mother did in the river. He would walk in front, and they would see how much he sinks. And then they would pull him out. And he was very proud. He felt that he's doing a very important service for these people. And he was always, he had a fur hat, he had the boots, and in this point where the partisans are, Ben's grandfather was there too with them, and his sister. Our families are entangled in that area. And so they were there in the partisans for a year and a half, constantly being on the run. And if you ever want to see a good movie about partisans, Defiance is the movie. That's the real story. That's the area where they were hiding. And there is more to go, but I think our time is such that if you have any questions, I want to leave you some time to ask or to listen. Oh, just a minute. And here I am in the barn, in Marila's barn. That's me up there. That's where mother was hiding. And I had to, we went, Mayor and I, Mayor for years, when I was growing up with Mayor, never talked about the Holocaust. My parents talked about the Holocaust all the time. And I grew with the stories of the Holocaust. I dreamed that I was there. I'm still dreaming about it. And Meir and his wife, I and Vered, my daughter, we traveled to meet Marila. Marila was still alive, and we wanted to meet her. And we went to her house, and here I am in the barn up there, and I had to sleep a night to see what my mother experienced for so many nights. And Vered and I slept up there in the barn. And this is where she is. That's where she used to jump out when she would see the Germans coming on the motorcycles. She always jumped out into the haystacks and went into the forest. And here is a picture of Marila and Meir in that visit that we did in 97. And there up there is Livia, Meir, Marila, I, and Vered on that visit. And Meir is my brother who lives in Israel. He has now 8 grandchildren. And these 8 grandchildren, as my mother would describe it, are her revenge. That's her heroism, coming through. And I love to tell the story. Mother came right before my youngest son, Eyal, was born. And preparing for the bris, she was sitting and peeling potatoes, making a potato salad. And in the background was playing, the television was playing. She did not understand English, but she knew that it was the story of how Eichmann was captured. That was the story in the background. And she's sitting with thoughts, and I thought, oh, I should turn off the radio, the TV. And then suddenly she looks up to the TV, and she talks to Eichmann, and she says, "See, Eichmann, Liebe from Petashne, I am alive. Where are you? And I'm going to bring another person into the Jewish world, to be circumcised tomorrow." It was something that I keep on thinking every time that, when I think about heroism, about my mother talking to Eichmann, the little woman who survived, who fought, who really tried to keep one child alive to continue and build this beautiful family that from one person that came out. My parents had pictures, they had relatives. They had relatives in South Africa, they had relatives in Copenhagen, they had relatives in Canada. And my mother had an uncle in Dublin. So before the war, they sent pictures to the families, and that's how the pictures survived. Nothing of my mother's belonging, beside some gold jewelry and silver cups that she buried, that she knew later to come and look. She didn't find everything, but she found some of them in the ground of her backyard that was burned down, that she was able to retrieve, and I have some of them. But the pictures were from the other places. Thank you for listening, and I hope you never have to go through that. But it is something that we have to remember, just like we say, Zachor et Amalek, remember Amalek, that we read every year before Purim. This is Amalek, and we need to remember it, and we tell the stories so our children remember that it should never happen again, not to let things like this happen.